Ash Carter's blood painted the snow crimson as Jax Brennan's boot connected with his ribs one final time. "Should have minded your own business about the wolves, kid," Jax snarled through the moonlight. The 17-year-old orphan lay broken on the mountain road, his jaw shattered, spine screaming. Jax, Marcus, and Dale stood over his crumpled form, their breath freezing in the Colorado air. "Is he?" Marcus's voice cracked. Jax checked the pulse at Ash's neck. Faint, barely there. He grinned. "Let the cold finish him. The wolves can have what's left." He turned to his crew. "No one knows he's out here. No one's coming." They climbed into Jax's pickup and drove away, tail lights swallowed by the darkness at 6,800 feet. Ash's phone lay shattered 4 feet from his outstretched hand, temperature plummeting to 28 degrees F. In 90 minutes, hypothermia would stop his heart. But Jax Brennan didn't know one thing: the mountain had been watching. Drop a like and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Let's continue with the story. The world returned in fragments. Stars first, brilliant and merciless, swimming in and out of focus like they were mocking him. Then the pain. God, the pain. It didn't crash over Ash in waves. It lived inside him, a living thing with teeth that never stopped chewing. His left side was on fire with each microscopic breath. Collapsed lung. He knew the signs. Had studied wilderness medicine in the same desperate way other kids studied video games. Each inhale felt like drowning in broken glass. The air wouldn't fill his chest properly. Kept catching, kept drowning him from the inside. He tried to move his jaw. White lightning exploded through his skull. Broken. Definitely broken. He could feel the wrongness, the way the bones didn't line up anymore, the way his tongue pressed against teeth that had shifted. Calling for help wasn't an option. Screaming wasn't an option. His vocal cords might work, but his shattered jaw would turn any sound into useless gargling. His right arm responded when he commanded it to move, barely. Fingers twitched. Elbow bent an inch, but his legs, nothing. He stared down the length of his body, willing his feet to move, his knees to bend. His body ignored him completely. Spinal fracture. Possible. Probable. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it just added itself to the growing list of reasons he was about to die. The phone. He needed his phone. Ash turned his head with agonizing slowness, ignoring the way his neck screamed in protest. Feet away, screen shattered into a spiderweb pattern but still glowing faintly in the snow. The battery icon blinked at 3%. Might as well be 4 miles away. Might as well be on Mars. His working arm couldn't reach it. His legs wouldn't drag him there. It was a taunt, that little glowing rectangle. Hope just out of reach. The cold was worse than the pain. That was the part that was going to kill him first. Ash knew hypothermia the way some people knew scripture. Had memorized the stages after his parents died. Some morbid fascination with understanding exactly how the mountain had murdered them. Stage 1. Uncontrollable shivering, confusion, difficulty moving. His whole body was shaking now, violent tremors he couldn't stop. Stage 2. Drowsiness, slurred speech, confusion, loss of coordination. He could feel it creeping in at the edges of his thoughts, making them slow and sticky. Stage 3. Paradoxical undressing, where victims got so confused they stripped naked thinking they were burning up. Then death. At 28 degrees Fahrenheit and 6,800 feet elevation, the thin air made everything worse. Hypothermia worked faster up here. The math was brutal and simple. Core body temperature dropped 1 degree per hour in conditions like this. He'd already lost consciousness once. How long had he been out? 20 minutes, 30. His core temp was probably already down to 94 degrees. Normal was 98.6. At 90 degrees, his heart would start failing. At 86, clinical death. 90 minutes, maybe less. That's all he had. The memory hit him without permission. He was 9 years old again, standing in front of Sheriff Morrison's cruiser, wrapped in a thermal blanket that didn't stop the shaking. Your parents didn't suffer, son. The avalanche was quick. But Ash had read the report later when he was old enough to access the file. They'd lived for hours in the snow. His mother's body showed signs of trying to dig herself out. His father had died trying to reach her. Nothing about it was quick. They'd left him their cabin and enough money to survive if he was careful. No other family. No grandparents. No aunts or uncles who wanted a traumatized kid. Just Ash and 40 acres of wilderness, and a silence that never really went away. 8 years of teaching himself to survive. 8 years of wondering if he'd die the same way they did, cold and alone, buried under the mountain's indifference. Nobody knew he was out here. That was the knife twist. He'd confronted Jax this afternoon at the ranger station, shown them the game camera footage of the poaching operation, had driven straight back to his cabin without telling anyone because who was there to tell? The Rangers said they'd handle it, said they'd pick Jax up tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, Jax must have known someone tipped them off, must have followed Ash from town. And now Ash was dying on an abandoned logging road that nobody used in winter. His cabin sat empty. No one would check on him. School wouldn't miss him until Monday, 3 days away. By then, the wolves would have scattered his bones, and whatever was left of him would be frozen into the road like some grotesque sculpture. Ash stared up at the stars. They were beautiful, he'd give them that. The full moon hung there like a spotlight on his death scene, painting everything in silver and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Another answered. The forest was alive all around him while he died in the middle of it. He thought about his parents, wondered if this was what they'd seen in their last moments. The same stars, the same cold, the same calculations of time running out. His shivering was getting worse. His thoughts were starting to slip sideways, taking longer to form, stage 2 approaching. He tried to catalog what came next, but the sequence kept escaping him like trying to hold water in his broken hands. Movement. His peripheral vision caught it. Shadows in the tree line, multiple shapes flowing between the pines. His hindbrain registered the threat before his oxygen-starved conscious mind caught up. Wolves. His blood was in the air. Predators could smell it for miles. They were coming to finish what Jax had started. Ash watched them emerge from the darkness. 1, 3, 7, 10 more behind them. Their eyes caught the moonlight and threw it back, amber and gold and burning. They moved like smoke, like inevitability, forming a circle around his dying body. He couldn't run, couldn't fight, could barely breathe. So Ash Carter did the only thing left. He closed his eyes and waited for the teeth. The first wolf cleared the tree line with the fluid grace of a shadow-given form. Massive, easily 140 pounds, maybe more. Silver-black fur that caught the moonlight and transformed it into something otherworldly. Not gray, not white. Something in between, like storm clouds and starlight, had made a bargain. More followed. They didn't rush, didn't charge. They materialized from the darkness like they'd always been there, just waiting for permission to be seen. 5 wolves. 10. 15. Ash's fragmenting mind tried to count them, but they kept coming, flowing around both sides of the road, emerging from gaps in the pines he hadn't even noticed. 20 wolves. 25. 30. His brain rejected the number. Wolf packs didn't get this big. 7 or 8 members, maybe 12 in good territory. But 30, that wasn't a pack. That was an army. They formed concentric circles around him, tightening with each passing second. The outermost ring held position about 20 feet away. The inner circle closed to 10. Their eyes were locked on him, unblinking, reflecting the moon in shades of amber and gold and burnt orange. Predator eyes. Eyes that calculated weakness and opportunity. Eyes that had watched elk stumble and knew exactly when to strike. Ash knew the rules, had known them since he was old enough to hike alone. Don't run, that triggers the chase instinct. Don't show fear, they can smell it, sense it in your posture. Make yourself big, make noise, or play dead. But he was already nearly dead, and making himself big wasn't exactly an option when he couldn't move his legs and his lung was trying to drown him. The wolves weren't acting right. That was the thing that cut through his hypothermia-dulled thoughts. They should be circling more aggressively, testing his defenses, looking for the angle of attack. Pack hunters worked in coordinated strikes. Some would feint from the front while others tore at the hamstrings from behind. But these wolves just watched, waited. Their body language was wrong. Ears forward but not pinned back. Tails level, not raised in aggression or lowered in stalking mode. They looked almost uncertain. The largest wolf broke from the inner circle. The alpha had to be. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from never being challenged, never doubting his place at the top. Muscles rippled under that silver-black coat. Scars marked his shoulders and flanks. A fighter, a survivor. He approached to within 5 feet. 4, 3. Ash's working hand twitched, some useless instinct to protect himself. The wolf stopped, just sat there like a dog waiting for a command, moonlight painting his fur in shades of mercury and steel. Then he tilted his head. The gesture was so familiar, so unpredatory, that Ash's brain stuttered. Wolves didn't do that. Dogs did that. Wolves assessed prey. Dogs tried to understand. The alpha held his gaze, and Ash saw something in those amber eyes that didn't belong there. Recognition. Not the blank stare of an animal calculating whether he was food or threat. Something else. Something that looked almost like concern. The wolf shifted his weight, repositioning himself, and his right front paw came into full view under the moonlight. Ash's oxygen-starved brain registered the wrongness before understanding caught up. 3 toes. The paw had 3 toes instead of 4, and scars. Distinctive scarring pattern across the pad and up the leg, white lines against dark fur, forming a pattern Ash would know anywhere because he'd watched them heal. No, the memory hit him like a physical blow. 8 years ago, he'd been 9 years old, barely 3 months after his parents died, hiking the ridge trail because staying in the empty cabin hurt too much. He'd heard the whimpering first, high-pitched, desperate. Then he'd found the cub. Maybe 4 months old, small enough to still have puppy clumsiness in his movements. The steel jaw trap had clamped around his right front paw with the kind of mechanical cruelty humans were so good at designing. The cub had been there for hours, maybe days, chewing at his own leg, half dead from exposure and blood loss. Ash had spent 4 hours working that trap open. 4 hours while the cub whimpered and struggled and bit at him weakly. The springs were industrial strength, designed to hold wolves and coyotes until the trapper returned to finish them. He'd used rocks as levers, his jacket as padding, his belt to create a fulcrum. His hands had bled. The cub had bled more. When the jaws finally released, the paw was mangled beyond saving. The outermost toe had been nearly severed, hanging by threads of tissue. Ash had done what he had to do, used his pocket knife to remove it clean, packed the wound with snow and the cleanest cloth he had, wrapped it tight. The cub should have run, should have disappeared into the forest the moment he was free. Instead, he'd sat there, staring at Ash with those same amber eyes while Ash whispered the same things over and over. "It's okay. You're safe now. I've got you. You're going to be okay." The cub had touched his ruined paw to Ash's hand. Just once. Then he'd limped into the trees and vanished. Ash had hiked back every day for a week, leaving food, checking for signs. The food was always gone. The cub never appeared. He'd told himself the little wolf had survived, had wanted to believe it badly enough that it became truth. But he'd never actually known. Until now. "King Titan." The words came out mangled through his broken jaw, barely recognizable as language. The massive alpha's ears swiveled forward. His tail gave a single, deliberate wag. That same gesture, that same tilt of the head. The cub had done that too, right before he touched Ash's hand in what looked impossibly like gratitude. "You remember me?" Ash's vision was blurring, his thoughts sliding sideways into confusion that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with stage 2 hypothermia claiming ground. But he could still see King Titan lean forward, could still feel the wolf's scarred paw press deliberately against his frozen hand. Contact. Intentional contact. Not a threat, not predation. Something else. Something that looked like a promise. The other 29 wolves shifted their formation, tightening the circle but in a way that felt less like enclosure and more like protection. King Titan threw his massive head back, and the howl that ripped from his throat shattered the frozen silence into 1,000 pieces. But before that, before the sound that would wake the entire mountain range, King Titan did something that rewrote everything Ash thought he understood about the space between human and animal. The massive alpha lowered his head, pressed his scarred paw against Ash's frozen hand. Not a tentative touch, not an accident, deliberate, firm, the kind of contact that carried weight and intention. In wolf language, this was submission. This was trust. This was an alpha male, a creature designed by evolution to dominate, choosing to make himself vulnerable to a dying human who'd shown him mercy 8 years ago. The pressure of that paw against his numb fingers broke something in Ash's chest that had nothing to do with his collapsed lung. The other 29 wolves responded to their alpha's signal like a wave rolling backward. The tension bled out of their formation. Ears swiveled from alert to relaxed. Tails dropped from level wariness to neutral calm. Several of them sat, mirroring King Titan's posture. 2 younger wolves, siblings probably judging by their matching gray-brown coats, lay down entirely. Settling into the snow like this was just another night in the den. They weren't going to attack. The realization cut through Ash's hypothermia-dulled thoughts with crystal clarity. They weren't predators circling wounded prey. They were guards, protectors, a detail of soldiers taking up defensive positions around a fallen comrade. Hope flickered. Maybe their body heat would be enough. 30 wolves, if they pressed close, could generate serious warmth. He'd read about avalanche victims surviving because their rescue dogs had laid on them, sharing heat until help arrived. Maybe. No. Ash's medical knowledge crushed the hope before it could fully form. He was too far gone. Core body temperature was probably down to 93 degrees by now, maybe lower. His violent shivering had diminished to occasional tremors, not because he was warming up, but because his body was running out of fuel to burn. Stage 2 hypothermia, approaching stage 3. The wolf's body heat might slow the decline, might buy him another 30 minutes, but 30 minutes wasn't rescue. It was just a longer death. His thoughts were fragmenting, slipping away from him like water through fingers he could no longer feel. What was he thinking about? The wolves. Right, King Titan. The paw against his hand, except he couldn't feel it anymore. Couldn't feel his hands at all. Couldn't feel his feet. His core was stealing blood from his extremities, a desperate triage that would fail in the end because math didn't care about hope or loyalty or wolves who remembered kindness. 93 degrees. 92. 91. The numbers marched downward in his head like a countdown clock, each degree another door closing between him and survival. At 90 degrees, his heart would start failing. At 86, clinical death. He was maybe 20 minutes from the first milestone, 40 from the second. Ash tried to focus on King Titan's face, those amber eyes that held impossible recognition, but the wolf's features kept blurring, doubling, sliding out of focus. His peripheral vision was darkening. Not night, darker than night. The closing down of systems, the body deciding which functions were luxury and which were critical. Vision was luxury. Consciousness was luxury. Then King Titan moved. Threw his massive head back, muzzle pointed at the indifferent moon, and the howl that exploded from his chest wasn't anything Ash had ever heard before. This wasn't territorial marking. Wasn't a hunting call or a challenge or the social bonding vocalizations wolves used to maintain pack cohesion. This was desperation. This was a cry for help that carried across the frozen peaks like a flare shot into the sky, except made of sound instead of light. Raw, primal. A sound that predated language, that reached back to when humans and wolves first learned to read each other's intentions around Paleolithic campfires. The howl started low, a rumble that Ash felt through the ground beneath him, then climbed in pitch and intensity until it became something almost unbearable, beautiful and terrible in the same breath. It carried for miles. Had to. The acoustics of the valley would amplify it. Bounce it off rock faces and through pine forests and across every ridge within range. The 29 other wolves answered him. Not all at once. That would have been chaos. They joined in waves, their voices braiding together into a harmony that no human composer could have written because it operated on rules that existed before music theory, before notation, before anything except survival and need. 3 wolves started first, their howls weaving around King Titans like supporting vocals. Then 5 more. Then 10. The sound built and layered, high voices and low, young wolves and old, creating something that wasn't just noise but architecture. A cathedral of sound built from desperation and loyalty. Ash felt it vibrate through his broken body, felt it in his collapsed lung and shattered jaw and dying core. The howling sustained. 30 seconds. 60. 2 minutes of continuous vocalization that should have been impossible except wolves could sustain howls for 3 minutes or more when the stakes demanded it. And then from somewhere distant, maybe 2 miles north, an answer, faint but unmistakable, another pack responding to the emergency call. King Titan's ears swiveled toward the sound. He adjusted his pitch, changed the pattern of his howl like he was encoding information. Location, urgency, come now. The distant pack answered again, closer this time. They were coming. Another howl from the east, a third from somewhere up the mountain, then a fourth. Ash's fragmenting consciousness tried to count the different locations, but the numbers kept slipping away. 5 packs, 7 more. The entire valley was waking up, responding to King Titan's distress call with the kind of crossback cooperation that wasn't supposed to exist. Wolf packs were territorial. They fought each other over boundaries and hunting grounds. They didn't answer each other's emergency calls like some kind of mountain-wide mutual aid network, except they were, right now, for him. The sound grew until it filled the entire valley, echoing off rock faces and through canyons, building and building until it felt like the mountains themselves were howling. 30 wolves here, more approaching from 7 different directions. Not just King Titan's immediate family, not just the packs from adjacent territories. Every wolf within hearing range was responding like Ash was something worth saving. His oxygen-starved brain struggled to understand why. Then the memories surfaced, fragmented but clear. 8 years of walking these mountains. 8 years of finding traps and prying them open, finding wolves with porcupine quills embedded in their faces, and carefully removing them, leaving deer carcasses near den sites during harsh winters when hunting was thin. He'd never expected anything in return. Never wanted anything except to help creatures that shared his isolation, his understanding of what it meant to survive alone in a landscape designed to kill the weak. 30 wolves here, countless more converging, all because he'd spent 8 years showing them that not all humans were threats, that some could be trusted, that mercy existed. The howling continued, relentless and overwhelming, a sound that surely would carry down to the valley 11 miles away, would wake rangers and townspeople and anyone with ears to hear. King Titan's voice rose above the others, leading the chorus, his scarred paw still pressed against Ash's frozen hand like an anchor holding him to consciousness. "Hold on," that pressure seemed to say. "We've got you. We remember. Just hold on." The howling sustained. 20 minutes of continuous vocalization that echoed across the mountain range like a prayer sung in a language older than words. Ash clung to consciousness, using King Titan's breathing as an anchor. The steady rise and fall of the alpha's chest, the rhythm of air moving through powerful lungs, the occasional pause between howls where King Titan would glance down at him with those amber eyes before launching into the chorus again. More wolves arrived. They materialized from the darkness in pairs and small groups, drawn by the emergency call. A mated pair from the eastern ridge, scarred and battle-worn. 3 juveniles from somewhere north, barely old enough to hunt on their own. A grizzled old male with a torn ear and a limp who settled into the outer circle like he'd answered calls like this before. The protective formation expanded and tightened simultaneously. 30 wolves now, maybe more. Ash's fragmenting mind couldn't count them anymore. His core temperature was still dropping. 92 degrees, 91. The shivering had nearly stopped. That was bad. That meant his body was giving up the fight, conserving energy for the vital organs that would fail last. Heart, brain, liver, everything else was negotiable. King Titan's warmth pressed against his side helped, but it wasn't enough. Nothing would be enough except real rescue, real help, heated blankets and IV fluids and... engine sounds. Faint at first, then louder. The rumble of a vehicle echoing off the rock faces, bouncing through the valley in a way that made it impossible to tell which direction it was coming from. The wolves heard it too, ears swiveled, bodies tensed. Several stood, alert but not aggressive. Headlights cut through the trees about 400 yards down the road, approaching fast, too fast for the terrain. Ash's failing heart surged with something that felt like hope, but hurt like betrayal, because hope was dangerous when you were this close to death. Help. Someone had heard the howling. Rangers maybe, or a late-night hunter, or even just a local who knew these mountains and recognized the sound of distress. His vision was too blurred to see clearly, but he could make out the shape of a pickup truck, could see the headlights bouncing as it navigated the rough logging road, could hear the engine growling as it climbed toward him. Closer, 200 yards, 100. King Titan stood, positioning himself between Ash and the approaching vehicle. Not aggressive, cautious. The Alpha had learned long ago that vehicles meant humans, and humans were unpredictable. The other wolves held their formation, but every eye was tracking the truck. The headlights swung around the final bend, cutting through the darkness like knives, and then the truck rolled into full view. Ash's oxygen-starved brain registered the details in slow motion. Ford F-150, dark blue, extended cab, and on the license plate clearly visible in the reflected moonlight, JAX 87. No. The hope in his chest transformed into something cold and sharp and infinitely worse. Not rescue, not help. The truck stopped 20 feet away, engine idling, headlights painting the entire scene in harsh white light. 30 wolves, 1 dying teenager, and the full moon as witness. The driver's door opened. Jax Brennan stepped out. He had a hunting rifle in his hands. Marcus emerged from the passenger side, unarmed but tense. Dale climbed out from the back, carrying a heavy-duty flashlight. They stood there for a moment, taking in the scene, the wall of wolves, Ash's broken body, King Titan standing guard like some kind of mythical guardian. Jax's face twisted into something between rage and cold calculation. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the frozen air. "Isn't this convenient?" Ash tried to speak, but his broken jaw wouldn't cooperate. All that came out was a mangled sound that might have been a plea or a curse. Jax chambered around. The metallic click echoed in the silence between howls. The wolves had stopped their chorus when the vehicle arrived, and now the only sounds were the idling engine and Ash's labored breathing. "Here's what's going to happen," Jax said, talking more to Marcus and Dale than to Ash. "Kid's already half dead. Wolves are circling. Tragic accident, young fool comes out here alone, gets attacked by a pack. We'll fire some shots to scatter them, drag him into the trees, make it look right. Couple claw marks, some bite wounds. Forest Service will call it death by wildlife. Case closed." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Jax, man, this is survival," Jax cut him off. "He reported us. Rangers were coming tomorrow morning. You want to spend the next 20 years in prison for poaching? Or do you want to walk away clean?" Dale swept his flashlight across the wolf pack. The beam caught eyes, turned them into burning coals. "Those wolves aren't running. They're not acting normal. Look at them, they're positioned like they're protecting him." "Because they can smell the blood," Jack said, but his voice held an edge of uncertainty. "They're waiting for him to die so they can feed." "No," Marcus whispered. "That's not wolves don't do this. They're surrounding him like he's pack, like he's one of them." Jax raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel at Ash's head. "Then I'll make it look like we tried to save him but arrived too late. Heroic effort, tragic outcome. Better story anyway." King Titan's growl was a sound from the bottom of the earth. Low, sustained. A promise written in bass notes and barely contained violence. The massive alpha took one deliberate step forward, placing himself directly in the rifle's line of fire. Not cowering, not defensive, challenging. The message was crystal clear. "You'll have to go through me first." The other 29 wolves rose as one, a synchronized movement that looked choreographed, except it came from pure instinct and pack loyalty. They didn't charge. Didn't attack, just stood there forming an impenetrable wall between Jax and his target. Their eyes caught the headlights and the moonlight and threw it back in shades of gold and amber and burning copper. Marcus grabbed Jax's arm. "We need to leave, right now, this is insane." Jax shook him off, eyes never leaving King Titan. "He's the only witness. He dies tonight." He adjusted his aim, moving the rifle from Ash's head to the massive wolf standing guard. "Move, or I drop you first." King Titan's response was to take another step forward. Closer to the rifle, closer to death. The scarred alpha had survived traps and starvation and 8 brutal mountain winters. He'd fought rivals for territory, protected his pack from threats far more dangerous than one human with a gun. And now he stood his ground for the boy who'd freed him from steel jaws, the boy who'd given him a second chance at life. The other wolves closed ranks, tightening the protective circle until it became a living fortress. Dale backed toward the truck. "Jax, they're not scattering, they're advancing. This isn't normal. This isn't—" "Shut up." Jax's finger moved to the trigger. "Both of you shut up and let me think." Ash watched through blurring vision, his core temperature dropping past 90 degrees, his heart rate falling below 40 beats per minute. He wanted to scream at King Titan to run, to save himself, to abandon the dying human and disappear into the mountains where he belonged. But his broken jaw wouldn't form words, and his consciousness was slipping away like water through fingers he could no longer feel. In the distance, faint but growing louder, sirens wailed through the mountain night. Jax heard them too, his jaw clenched, finger tightening on the trigger. "No time!" He raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel at Ash's head. Center mass. Execution angle. One shot and the only witness disappears, leaving nothing but a story about wolves and tragedy and terrible accidents in the Colorado wilderness. King Titan moved, not the cautious repositioning of an animal calculating odds. This was terrifying speed wrapped in 140 pounds of muscle and fury and absolute conviction. One moment he was standing 3 feet to Ash's left. The next he was directly over Ash's broken body, all 4 legs planted like pillars, his massive frame forming a living shield between the rifle and the boy. He didn't crouch, didn't lower himself into a defensive posture. He stood tall, spine straight, head high, every line of his body radiating dominance and challenge. This was an alpha male at the peak of his power, and he was drawing a line in the snow that said, "Through me or not at all." His lip curled back in a snarl that exposed fangs designed by millions of years of evolution to crush elk vertebrae, to sever arteries, to crack bone like kindling. 3 inches long, white as moonlight, sharp enough to puncture Kevlar. The growl that rumbled from his chest wasn't a warning. Warnings were for threats that might still be negotiated, dangers that could be avoided through posturing and display. This was a promise, a guarantee. You point that weapon at him, you die. Simple mathematics written in bass notes and barely contained violence. The other 29 wolves rose as one. The synchronized movement was so perfect it looked rehearsed, except it came from pure pack instinct. When the alpha stands, the pack stands. When the alpha fights, the pack fights. No questions, no hesitation. They formed a wall around Ash and King Titan, shoulders nearly touching, creating an impenetrable fortress of fur and fangs and coordinated fury. Their eyes locked on Jax, on Marcus, on Dale, calculating distances, measuring angles of attack, waiting for the alpha's signal to become the nightmare these humans had earned. Dale's flashlight beam shook as it swept across the formation. "Jax, this is insane." His voice cracked on the last word. "They're not acting like animals, they're acting like soldiers. Like they're defending one of their own. They're just wolves," Jax said, but the rifle barrel wavered slightly. "Animals don't organize," Marcus whispered. "Animals don't look at them. They're in formation. This isn't pack behavior. This is military." Jax's face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. "I don't care if they're acting like the goddamn Navy SEALs. Move, now." He fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed off the rock faces, amplified by the valley's acoustics into something that sounded like artillery. Birds exploded from nearby trees. The sound rolled across the mountains, announcing violence to everything with ears to hear. The wolves didn't flinch, didn't scatter, didn't even break eye contact. If anything, they tightened formation, the outer ring moving 3 steps closer, the inner ring solidifying until there were no gaps, no weaknesses, no way through that didn't involve going through 30 wolves simultaneously. A juvenile on the left let out a sharp bark, not aggression, communication. 2 others answered. They were coordinating, talking to each other in a language Jax couldn't speak but could absolutely understand. "We're ready. Give the word." The sirens were getting louder. Maybe 5 minutes away, maybe less. Sound traveled weird in the mountains, bounced off terrain in ways that made distance impossible to judge. But they were coming. Rangers or police or someone with authority and backup in questions Jax didn't want to answer. "Last chance," Jax said, swinging the rifle back to King Titan. He aimed at the massive wolf's head, right between those burning amber eyes. "Move or I drop you where you stand." King Titan's response was to take one deliberate step forward. Not to the side, not backward, forward, directly toward the rifle barrel, closing the distance, making himself an even more obvious target. His message was crystal clear. "I know what that weapon does. I know you can kill me. I don't care. You'll have to." The scarred paw that Ash had freed from steel jaws 8 years ago planted firmly in the snow between Jax and his target. This ground. No further. Marcus grabbed Jax's arm with both hands. "We need to leave. Right now." "Those sirens are getting close and we're standing here with a rifle pointed at a kid." Jax spun and backhanded Marcus across the face. The crack of flesh on flesh was almost as loud as the gunshot had been. Marcus stumbled backward, hand going to his bleeding lip, eyes wide with shock. "He's the only witness," Jax snarled. "You understand? The only one who can put us at that ranger station. The only one who saw us set those traps. The only one who can testify. He dies tonight or we all go to prison for the next 20 years. Dale was backing toward the truck, step by careful step, hands raised like he was trying to calm a dangerous animal. "Jax, man, listen to yourself. This was poaching. That's a fine, maybe probation. But if you shoot that kid, if you murder him, that's life in prison. That's game over." "It's not murder if the wolves did it," Jax said. His voice had gone cold, flat, the tone of a man who'd made his decision and was done debating. Turned back to King Titan, to Ash, to the wall of wolves that refused to break. "Just animals doing what animals do." He adjusted his grip on the rifle, centered his aim. King Titan didn't move, didn't retreat, just stood there, scarred and magnificent and absolutely fearless, protecting the boy who'd shown him mercy when mercy was the only thing that stood between a cub and death. The other wolves tensed, muscles coiling, preparing to launch. If Jax pulled that trigger, they would tear him apart. He might kill King Titan, probably would at this range, but the remaining 29 would reach him before he could chamber a second round. He'd die screaming in the snow, torn to pieces by fangs and fury. Everyone there knew it. The math was simple and brutal, but desperate men don't do math. Desperate men make desperate choices. Jax's finger moved to the trigger. Ash watched through vision that was more darkness than light. his core temperature dropping past 89 degrees, his heart struggling to find rhythm. He wanted to scream at King Titan to run, to abandon him, to save himself. The wolf had already given him 8 years more than he had any right to expect. That should be enough. That was enough. But his broken jaw wouldn't form words, and his body wouldn't obey commands, and all he could do was watch as King Titan stood his ground, ready to die for a human who'd freed him from a trap one autumn afternoon when they were both too young to understand what loyalty would cost. The sirens were screaming now, close enough to make out individual vehicles. Multiple units, coming fast, maybe 2 minutes away. Jax had seconds to make his choice, pull the trigger and try to sell the story, or run and live to fight another day. His finger tightened. The rifle barrel steadied. King Titan's amber eyes never wavered. Time seemed to stop, balanced on the edge of a bullet and a decision and 30 wolves who'd chosen their side. Then everything happened at once. The sirens were close now, maybe a mile out, their wailing cutting through the mountain night with the promise of authority and consequences and an end to the standoff that couldn't come fast enough. Jax heard them, calculated the time he had left. 30 seconds, maybe 60. Not enough to stage anything, not enough to create the perfect crime he'd envisioned, but enough to eliminate the witness. If he was going down, if those sirens meant the end of everything, then Ash Carter was going with him. Jax made his choice. He swung the rifle barrel away from King Titan, aimed directly at Ash's head. Center mass. Execution shot. One trigger pull and the testimony dies with the witness. King Titan saw the movement, understood it with the primal clarity that comes from being a predator who's learned to read intention in the microseconds before violence explodes. The Alpha launched, not a defensive repositioning, not a warning charge. This was a full commitment attack, every muscle in his 140-pound frame uncoiling like a spring, propelling him through the air in an arc calculated by instinct and desperation, and 8 years of remembered mercy. Jax fired. The muzzle flash lit up the night like lightning. The crack of the rifle echoed off rock faces, announcing murder to the mountains. But the bullet meant for Ash's brain caught King Titan instead. The massive wolf was already airborne, already between the rifle and the boy, and the round punched into his left shoulder with the kind of impact that could drop an elk. King Titan crashed to the ground hard, momentum carrying him past Ash in a tumble of fur and blood and broken trajectory. He should have stayed down. Any rational creature would have stayed down. The shoulder wound was catastrophic. Entrance wound the size of a quarter, exit wound bigger, blood pumping out in rhythmic spurts that painted the snow crimson. But King Titan wasn't operating on rationality. He was operating on something older, something that transcended self-preservation. The Alpha struggled back to his feet, 3 legs working, the 4th dangling useless, blood streaming down his silver-black coat. He limped back to Ash, positioned himself over the boy's body again, and the growl that rumbled from his chest was pure defiance despite the agony that had to be screaming through every nerve. "I'm still here." Jax chambered another round. The metallic click was obscene in the sudden silence, mechanical violence in a night that had become all too organic. "Stupid animal," he muttered, raising the rifle again. This time he aimed at King Titan's chest. Center mass on the wolf. Remove the obstacle, then finish the job. He fired. The second bullet caught King Titan just below the sternum, tearing through muscle and possibly nicking the lung. The impact staggered the massive wolf backward 2 steps. His legs buckled. He went down to his front knees, head dropping, blood pouring from 2 wounds now, his breathing suddenly labored and wet-sounding. But he didn't collapse completely, didn't fall to the side. He stayed upright on his haunches, body still positioned over Ash, still forming that shield even as his own life pumped out into the frozen ground. The other 29 wolves had been holding position, waiting for some signal, some indication of what their Alpha wanted them to do. The second gunshot was all the permission they needed. They exploded into coordinated fury, not a chaotic charge, not a panicked rush. This was organized violence, wolves coming from 4 different angles simultaneously, cutting off escape routes, herding Jax into a kill zone with the practiced efficiency of predators who'd taken down elk and deer using these exact tactics. Jax swung the rifle toward the advancing wolves, panic finally cracking through his cold calculation. He fired a 3rd shot, not aimed, just desperate, and the bullet caught King Titan in the right foreleg. The alpha finally collapsed completely, his body covering Ash like a shield, warm blood soaking through the boy's jacket and onto his skin. The massive wolf's breathing was ragged, labored, each inhale rattling in his chest where the second bullet had done its damage. Marcus was screaming something. Dale was already in the truck, engine starting. The wolves were 15 feet away. 10. Their snarls were the sound of impending death, 30 throats promising retribution in a language every prey animal understood. Then headlights cut through the trees from the opposite direction. Multiple vehicles. A pickup truck with Forest Service emblazoned on the side. 2 more behind it. They skidded to a stop, doors flying open, and Chief Ranger Alina Rodriguez emerged with 4 other rangers, all carrying weapons, all moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from years of dealing with dangerous situations in dangerous terrain. "Drop the rifle, now." Rodriguez's voice carried absolute authority, the kind that didn't leave room for debate or negotiation. "Drop it or we drop you." Jax looked at the advancing wolves, at the rangers with weapons drawn, at Marcus who'd abandoned him, at Dale already trying to drive away. He let the rifle fall from his hands, raised both arms above his head. The wolves stopped their advance but didn't retreat. They held position in a loose semicircle, blocking any escape route, eyes locked on Jax like they were memorizing his face for future reference. Rodriguez moved in fast, kicked the rifle away, had Jax on his knees with hands behind his back in seconds. 2 rangers secured Marcus. A 3rd unit was already pursuing Dale's truck down the mountain. The 4th ranger, a young woman with EMT patches on her uniform, rushed toward Ash. "We've got a critical here." Male, late teens, multiple traumas, possible hypothermia. She stopped when she saw King Titan. The massive wolf lay across Ash's body, 3 bullet wounds bleeding steadily, his breathing shallow and irregular. He lifted his head slightly, amber eyes focusing on the approaching human, and managed a weak growl despite the agony. "It's okay," the ranger whispered, hands raised, non-threatening. "I'm here to help, both of you." She reached for Ash's neck, checking for a pulse, and King Titan didn't stop her. Let her work. Trusted her in the way dying creatures sometimes trust the final kindness of strangers. Ash felt the ranger's fingers against his throat, felt King Titan's weight pressing down on him, felt the wolf's blood mixing with his own. His core temperature had dropped to 86 degrees, the edge of clinical death. His heart was struggling, irregular beats separated by long pauses, trying to decide if continuing was worth the effort. 22 beats per minute, 18:15. He tried to focus on King Titan's face, those amber eyes that had recognized him, that had remembered mercy from 8 years ago and repaid it with 3 bullets and a body used as armor. Tried to tell the wolf thank you, tried to say I'm sorry, tried to communicate everything that mattered in the seconds he had left. But his broken jaw wouldn't form words, and his vision was narrowing to a tunnel, and the tunnel was filling with darkness. King Titan's breathing was getting slower, rattling. The wolf's eyes were starting to glaze. They were dying together in the snow under the full moon, predator and protector and the boy who'd freed them both from different kinds of traps. The ranger was calling for emergency transport, her voice urgent and distant. Rodriguez was reading Jax's rights. Somewhere in the background, more sirens approached. But all of that was happening in a different world, a world that was rapidly fatting as hypothermia and blood loss and cardiac failure staged their final assault. Ash's heart rate dropped below 10 beats per minute, then stopped entirely. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him completely was King Titan's scarred paw, still pressed against his hand, even in death refusing to let go. Ranger Rodriguez had seen a lot in 15 years of mountain rescue. Hikers with compound fractures, climbers with hypothermia, hunters who'd shot themselves or each other. But she'd never seen anything like this. A teenage boy in cardiac arrest with a bullet-riddled wolf draped across him like a blanket, both of them dying in the snow while 29 other wolves stood guard in silent witness. Patient unresponsive, the young EMT ranger, Stevens, fresh out of certification, had her fingers on Ash's throat, searching for a pulse that wasn't there. No carotid pulse, no respiration. Core temp, she glanced at the handheld thermometer. Jesus, 85.9 degrees. That's incompatible with life, Rodriguez said, already moving. She'd done mountain medicine long enough to know the numbers. Below 86 degrees Fahrenheit, the heart stopped functioning reliably. Below 82, brain death was likely even if they managed to restart the heart. Ash was hanging on the knife's edge. Stevens was starting chest compressions, counting under her breath, trying to pump blood through a body that had stopped cooperating. The wolves watched but didn't interfere, their formation still holding despite the chaos. King Titan hadn't moved. The massive alpha lay across Ash like a shield, his own breathing irregular and wet-sounding, 3 bullet wounds still bleeding. Rodriguez made the calculation in seconds. St. Michael's Hospital was 65 minutes away through mountain switchbacks that were treacherous even in good conditions. With ice on the roads and this weather, add another 20 minutes. 85 minutes minimum. The kid would be brain dead long before they reached the emergency room. But the Colorado Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was 12 minutes east, straight shot on the main forest road. She keyed her radio. "This is Rodriguez to Wildlife Rehab Center. Do you copy?" Static, then a woman's voice, calm and professional. "Copy, Rodriguez. This is Dr. Chen. We've got a critical hypothermia case. Male, 17 years old, cardiac arrest, core temp 85.9 and dropping. Hospital is over an hour away. Requesting emergency authorization to transport to your facility and use predator protocols." Silence on the other end. Rodriguez could almost hear Chen doing the math, weighing the regulations against reality. What she was asking was technically illegal. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was licensed for animals, not humans. Using veterinary protocols on a human patient could cost Chen her medical license, could result in criminal charges if anything went wrong. "Dr. Chen," Rodriguez pressed. "He's got maybe 10 minutes before we lose him permanently." Another pause, then, "Bring him in, I'll prep the Grizzly surgery suite, ETA. 12 minutes. Make it 10, and Rodriguez." This conversation never happened. The ambulance screamed down the mountain with lights and sirens carving a path through the darkness. Stevens rode in back with Ash, maintaining chest compressions the entire way, her arms burning with the effort. 30 compressions, 2 breaths through the bag valve mask. 30 more. The rhythm of CPR that every EMT knew by muscle memory. "Still no pulse," Stevens reported, voice tight with exhaustion. "Core temp holding at 85.9. Holding was good. Not dropping was good. But they needed warming, fast, the kind of aggressive rewarming that required equipment most ambulances didn't carry. They needed the Wildlife Center. The facility materialized out of the darkness like something from a fever dream. A sprawling complex of buildings designed to treat injured bears, mountain lions, wolves. The main surgery suite was lit up like an operating theater, and Dr. Sarah Chen stood waiting at the intake bay doors. She was 50-something, compact and efficient-looking, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. The name tag identified her as Director of Veterinary Medicine, but Rodriguez knew the real story. Chen had been a combat surgeon in Afghanistan before burnout and PTSD drove her to treat animals instead of soldiers. "Get him inside," Chen commanded, already moving. "Table 3, it's prepped for thermal intervention." They transferred Ash onto a surgical table designed to hold an 800-pound grizzly bear. The thing was massive, all stainless steel and hydraulic lifts. Industrial heat lamps hung from the ceiling, already activated, bathing the table in infrared warmth that felt like standing too close to a bonfire. Chen worked with the kind of calm efficiency that came from making life-or-death decisions under mortar fire. Core temp, 85.9, no change. Cardiac activity, flatline. "We've been doing manual compressions for," Stevens glanced at her watch, 8 minutes. "Keep going. Start forced air warming, set it to 110 degrees. Chen was already prepping an IV line, getting access to the femoral artery. "We're doing peritoneal lavage, same protocol I'd use for a hypothermic wolf." She made the incision with practiced precision, small opening in the lower abdomen, just big enough to insert the catheter. Then she was flooding Ash's abdominal cavity with heated saline, the same technique used to rewarm large predators who'd been found nearly frozen. The warm fluid would transfer heat directly to the internal organs, warming the core faster than any external method. "Still flatline," Stevens reported, her voice starting to crack. 9 minutes of CPR. 10. The human brain could only survive so long without oxygen. Chen activated the forced air warming system. Heated air pumped through a special blanket wrapped around Ash's body, raising his external temperature while the peritoneal lavage worked on the core. 11 minutes. 12. Come on, Chen muttered, checking the cardiac monitor. Still flatline. Still no organized electrical activity in the heart. She made a decision. Climbed directly onto the table, kneeling beside Ash's body, and began aggressive chest compressions herself. She'd done this on soldiers in field hospitals, had literally beaten hearts back to life with the sheer force of her will and the mechanics of CPR. 13 minutes. 14. Her arms were screaming, but she didn't slow down. 30 compressions, perfectly timed, the heel of her hand driving down with enough force to compress the sternum 2 inches. Blood had to move. Oxygen had to reach the brain. Core temp rising, Stevens called out. 86 to 86.5. Progress. Finally. The lavage was working. 15 minutes of CPR. 16. Chen grabbed a syringe of veterinary-grade epinephrine from the crash cart, the same drug she'd use on a wolf in cardiac arrest, just a different dosage. She injected it directly into the IV line. Come on, kid, you didn't survive this long to quit now. 17 minutes. The heart monitor beeped. Once. A single spike in the flatline there and gone so fast Chen almost missed it. Again, she whispered, continuing compressions. Come on. Another beep, then another. Irregular, disorganized, but electrical activity, the heart was trying. We've got something. Stevens was staring at the monitor. Sinus rhythm barely 35 beats per minute. Chen kept up the compressions, helping the struggling heart maintain output. Core temp, 87.1, still rising. The heart rate climbed. 40 beats per minute, 45, 50. The rhythm was stabilizing, finding its footing. Chen finally stopped compressions, watching the monitor like a hawk. 55 beats per minute. 60. Still weak, still irregular, but sustained. 65 BPM. 70. Then Ash's eyes snapped open. Not the slow flutter of someone waking peacefully. This was violent consciousness, the kind that came from being dragged back from the edge of death. His eyes were wild, unfocused, pupils blown wide with panic and confusion. His broken jaw tried to work, tried to form words, and what came out was garbled and desperate. Chen leaned close, trying to understand. Ash's working hand grabbed her arm with surprising strength for someone who'd been clinically dead 2 minutes ago. His eyes locked on hers, and through the mangled sounds his jaw was making, she caught 2 words repeated over and over. King Titan! King Titan! King Titan! You need to stay still, Chen said, trying to push him back down onto the table. Your core temperature is barely 89 degrees. You've been in cardiac arrest. Your body... Ash wasn't listening. He was already trying to sit up, his working arm pushing against the table, his legs trying to remember how to function. The IV lines in his arms pulled taut. Chen reached for them, but Ash was faster, ripping them out with a violence that sent blood spattering across the surgical table. Alarms started shrieking. Stevens moved to restrain him, but Ash was already swinging his legs off the table, trying to stand on limbs that had forgotten how to bear weight. He crashed to the floor, caught himself on his hands and knees, looked up at Chen with eyes that held more desperation than any human should be able to contain. King Titan! The words were clearer now, forced through his broken jaw with sheer will. He saved my life. I'm not leaving him to die. Chen stared at this broken teenager. Hypothermic and traumatized and barely resurrected from clinical death, trying to stand up for a wolf that had taken 3 bullets. Any sane person would have sedated him, strapped him down, kept him stable until proper medical transport arrived. But Chen had been a combat surgeon, had watched soldiers drag themselves off operating tables to get back to their units, had seen what loyalty looked like when it transcended logic and self-preservation. Wolf earned this, Ranger Rodriguez said quietly from the doorway. She'd been standing there watching, and her voice carried the kind of authority that came from 15 years of witnessing impossible things in these mountains. We go back. We find him. Chen looked between them, the half-dead teenager and the ranger who understood mountain justice better than any textbook. She made her decision. Stevens, get him stabilized enough to move. Rodriguez, prep your vehicle. I'll grab my field surgery kit. 20 minutes later, they were back at the scene. The other wolves had dispersed, melting into the forest like they'd never been there. Jax was gone, arrested and already halfway down the mountain in the back of a ranger cruiser. Marcus was giving his statement to another ranger. The only evidence of what had happened was the blood. So much blood. Crimson painted across white snow in patterns that told the story of violence and sacrifice and 3 bullets that should have killed. But King Titan's body wasn't there. Ash stood in the exact spot where the massive alpha had collapsed over him, and there was nothing. Just blood and the depression in the snow where 140 pounds of dying wolf had lain. Rodriguez was already tracking, her flashlight beam following a trail that led northeast into the forest. "Heavy blood trail," she called back. "He's alive, or was when he left here." Ash didn't need to ask where King Titan had gone. He knew. Recognized the direction with the kind of certainty that came from 8 years of walking these mountains. 8 years of knowing every trail and cave and secret place where wounded creatures went to heal or die. "The sacred cave," he said, already moving toward the tree line. 2 miles northeast. That's where I found him in the trap." Chen grabbed her field kit, a waterproof pack designed for emergency veterinary interventions in the backcountry. It had everything she'd need for field surgery on a large predator. Probably everything she'd need to save a wolf with 3 bullet wounds. Maybe. They followed the blood trail through snow that came up to their knees in places. Ash moved like someone running on pure will, his body protesting every step but his mind refusing to acknowledge the protests. His core temperature was still dangerously low. His broken jaw throbbed with every jarring footfall. But King Titan had taken 3 bullets meant for him, and Ash would crawl the 2 miles on his hands and knees if that's what it took. The blood trail was impossible to miss. Heavy drops every few feet, sometimes spurts where King Titan had paused or stumbled. The wolf was bleeding out as he walked, leaving a breadcrumb trail of life draining away into the frozen ground. Rodriguez kept pace, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, occasionally calling out landmarks. Trails staying consistent. He's moving with purpose, not wandering. 30 minutes of hiking through terrain that would have been challenging even without hypothermia and cardiac arrest. Ash's legs were shaking. His vision kept blurring. But the cave entrance materialized through the trees exactly where he knew it would be, a dark opening in the rock face, partially hidden by pine boughs and the natural camouflage of the mountainside. The same cave where he'd spent 4 hours 8 years ago, working to free a trapped cub from steel jaws that had crushed bone and destroyed a paw. The blood trail led directly inside. They entered slowly, flashlights probing the darkness. The cave went back about 40 feet, narrowing into a chamber at the rear. Ash had been here dozens of times since that first day, had left food for King Titan when he was young, had thought of this place as sacred ground where mercy had been given and received. King Titan lay in the back chamber. The massive alpha had collapsed on his side, 3 bullet wounds still seeping blood in slow, rhythmic pulses. His breathing was labored, shallow, each inhale accompanied by a wet rattle that spoke of damaged lungs and fluid where there should be air. His eyes were half closed, fever bright. 6 wolves stood guard around him, pack members who'd followed their wounded alpha to his chosen ground. They growled as the humans approached, but it was half-hearted, exhausted. They knew King Titan was dying. They were just standing witness. Chen moved past them with the confidence of someone who treated hundreds of large predators. She knelt beside King Titan, began her examination with practiced hands. The alpha didn't even try to bite her. He was too far gone for that. Left shoulder wound, through and through, missed major arteries but did significant muscle damage. Chen was cataloging as she worked. Chest wound grazed the left lung, bleeding internally but not catastrophically. Right foreleg. She probed gently, and King Titan's breathing hitched. The bullet's still in there. Lodged near the brachial artery, maybe 6 centimeters from his heart. That's the problem. She looked up at Ash, her expression grim. 2 bullets passed through clean. Those wounds I can manage, antibiotics, sutures, drainage. But that 3rd bullet is pressing on major blood vessels. His body temperature is 104 degrees. Infection is already setting in. Without surgery in the next hour to remove the bullet and clean the wound, sepsis will kill him faster than blood loss. Ash lowered himself to his knees beside King Titan, his legs finally giving out. "Then we do surgery here." Chen stared at him. This broken teenager who'd been clinically dead less than 2 hours ago, who could barely stand, who should be in a hospital bed with a dozen specialists monitoring his recovery. "You're hypothermic. You can barely stand. I don't need to stand," Ash interrupted. His voice was stronger now, forced through his broken jaw with absolute conviction. "I need to hold him still." He reached out, placed his hand on King Titan's scarred paw, the same paw he'd bandaged 8 years ago. The same paw that had pressed against his frozen hand an hour ago, promising protection and loyalty and everything that mattered more than survival. King Titan's eyes opened fully, focused on Ash. Something passed between them that Chen couldn't name but could absolutely recognize. The bond forged between two creatures who'd saved each other's lives and would die before abandoning that debt. "I operated on soldiers in caves in Afghanistan," Chen said quietly, already unpacking her field kit. "At least this one doesn't have incoming mortar fire." She worked by the harsh light of an LED lantern Rodriguez had positioned on a flat rock, supplemented by a headlamp that cast stark shadows across the cave walls. The light turned King Titan's blood into something that looked black instead of red, made the bullet wounds look like dark portals into his body. Chen's hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done field surgery in worse conditions. The sedative cocktail went in first, a careful mixture of ketamine and dexmedetomidine that she'd use on any large predator requiring emergency intervention. Not full anesthesia. That would be too dangerous in King Titan's weakened state, with his blood pressure already compromised and his body fighting infection. This was just enough to dull the pain, to take the edge off the agony so she could work without the wolf thrashing and tearing open arteries. She drew the mixture into a syringe, found the injection site in King Titan's thigh, and pushed the plunger slowly. "Give it 60 seconds, she said. King Titan's breathing began to slow, his body relaxing incrementally as the drugs took effect. His eyes stayed half open, still aware but distant, like he was watching everything from somewhere far away. Ash shifted position, carefully cradling the massive wolf's head in his lap. King Titan was heavy, even weakened and dying, 140 pounds of apex predator. But Ash positioned himself so the wolf's skull rested against his thigh, so those amber eyes could focus on his face if they needed an anchor. "I've got you, brother," Ash whispered. The same words he'd spoken 8 years ago when he was 9 years old and terrified, working to free a trapped cub from steel jaws that had crushed bone and destroyed hope. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." His hand, the one that still worked properly, stroked along King Titan's scarred muzzle. Gentle, rhythmic, the kind of touch that said, "You're not alone, I'm here, we're in this together." Chen worked fast. Speed was life in field surgery. Every second King Titan's body was open to the cave's bacteria. Every moment those wounds weren't closed, the infection had more opportunity to spread. She started with the shoulder wound. Through and through, the bullet had entered high on the left side and exited near the spine. Muscle damage was significant but manageable. She cleaned the wound with sterile saline, flushed out debris and dead tissue, packed it with antibiotic-soaked gauze. That one could wait for sutures. The chest wound was next. The bullet had grazed the left lung, not a direct hit, but close enough to cause internal bleeding. Chen could hear the fluid when King Titan breathed, that wet rattle that spoke of blood where there should be air. She inserted a small drainage tube, positioned it carefully to allow the blood to drain without collapsing the lung further. Then it was time for the real problem. The right foreleg wound looked small from the outside, just an entrance hole the size of a quarter, dark and crusted with dried blood. But inside, that bullet had traveled deep, lodging itself between two ribs, millimeters from the pericardium, the membrane surrounding King Titan's heart. Chen positioned her headlamp, adjusted the angle until she could see into the wound cavity. There. A fragment of copper jacket, deformed from impact, pressed against bone and major blood vessels. One wrong move and King Titan would bleed out before she could get pressure on the artery. She reached for her hemostats, surgical clamps designed to grab and hold tissue, to control bleeding, to extract foreign objects from places human fingers couldn't reach. "Hold him steady," she told Ash. "This is the part that's going to hurt." Ash tightened his grip on King Titan's head, positioned himself to prevent any thrashing. The six-pack wolves pressed closer, watching with eyes that held impossible intelligence. They understood this was life or death. They were bearing witness. Chen inserted the hemostats into the wound, following the path the bullet had carved through muscle and tissue. She could feel resistance, could feel the delicate balance between enough pressure to grip the fragment and too much pressure that would tear blood vessels. The hemostats touched metal. She adjusted her angle, got a solid grip, and began to extract. King Titan's body tensed despite the sedative. A low whine escaped his throat, pure pain, the kind that cut through drugs and willpower. Ash was whispering constant reassurance, his hand never stopping its gentle stroking along the wolf's muzzle. The bullet fragment moved. Millimeter by millimeter, Chen drew it out, watching for any sign of arterial bleeding, ready to clamp down on vessels if necessary. The fragment cleared the ribs, cleared the muscle. Came free of the wound in a final extraction that brought a fresh welling of blood but nothing catastrophic. Got it, Chen breathed. She dropped the mangled copper into her palm, showed it to Rodriguez. 3 centimeters long, that's what was trying to kill him. She went back into the wound with fresh gauze, applying pressure to control the bleeding, flushing with saline to clear out any remaining debris. Then she was suturing, 43 stitches across 3 wounds. Chen counted each one, her hands moving with mechanical precision even as fatigue began to set in. Internal sutures first, closing the deep muscle layers. Then external, bringing skin together in neat rows that would heal clean if infection didn't claim him first. The antibiotics went in next, a broad-spectrum cocktail designed for large predators, injected into the muscle tissue. Then subcutaneous fluids, liters of saline pumped under the skin to combat dehydration and shock. Chen worked for 4 hours straight. Her back ached from hunching over. Her hands cramped from the delicate work. But she didn't stop until every wound was closed, every intervention complete, every possible advantage given to the wolf who'd taken 3 bullets to save a boy's life. Finally, she sat back on her heels, stripped off her blood-soaked gloves, and checked King Titan's vitals one more time. Temperature, 102.8 degrees. Still elevated but dropping. Heart rate, 68 beats per minute. Stronger, more regular. Respiration, 18 breaths per minute. The wet rattle was diminishing as the drainage tube did its work. "He's stable," Chen said, the words coming out thick with exhaustion. "Not out of danger, but stable." Dawn was breaking. The first rays of sunlight filtered into the cave entrance, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The 6 pack wolves had settled into resting positions, their vigil continuing but their tension eased. Ash hadn't moved. He was still cradling King Titan's head, still whispering words of reassurance, his own body shaking with exhaustion and hypothermia that hadn't fully resolved. His core temperature was probably still dangerously low. His broken jaw had to be screaming in agony, but he refused to leave. Chen watched him lie down beside the massive wolf, positioning himself so their bodies touched, so King Titan could feel his presence even through the sedative fog. It was insane. It violated every medical protocol Chen had ever learned. This kid should be in a hospital with a dozen specialists monitoring his recovery. Instead, he was lying on a cave floor beside a wolf, sharing warmth and presence and the kind of loyalty that transcended species. "You're both insane," Chen said quietly, pulling a thermal blanket from her pack and draping it over both of them. "And you'll probably both survive because of it." King Titan's eyes opened. Not fully alert, the sedative still had him in its grip, but aware. Those amber eyes found Ash's face, held his gaze for a long moment. Then the massive wolf released a soft chuff. It was quiet, barely audible over the sound of his labored breathing, but Ash heard it, understood it. In wolf language, that sound meant safe, meant home, meant family. Ash's hand found King Titan's scarred paw, the one he'd bandaged 8 years ago, and held on as the dawn light filled the cave with gold. 3 weeks passed before Ash was released from the Colorado Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Dr. Chen kept him longer than standard protocol required, monitoring his recovery with the same intensity she'd have given a wolf returning from critical injury. His core temperature had stabilized. His broken jaw was wired shut, healing slowly but healing. The hypothermia had caused some peripheral nerve damage in his fingers, frostbite that would leave permanent scars, but he'd keep all his digits. He could walk, could think clearly, could survive. Chen handed him discharge papers with one hand and strict orders with the other. Rest, physical therapy 3 times a week, no strenuous activity for 6 weeks minimum. And Ash, she waited until he looked at her. What you did was insane and beautiful, and you're never doing it again. He tried to smile through the wires holding his jaw together. Couldn't quite manage it. But his eyes said thank you, said I would do it again in a heartbeat, said some things are worth dying for. Ranger Rodriguez visited that afternoon with news that felt like justice distilled into legal proceedings. Jax Brennan had been sentenced to 35 years for attempted murder, assault with intent to kill, illegal poaching, and a dozen other charges that stacked like cordwood. Marcus got 15 years for his role, though his testimony against Jax had probably saved him from more. Dale had turned state's evidence, cooperated fully, and received probation plus 1,000 hours of community service with the Forest Service. He'd spend the next 2 years clearing trails and maintaining ranger stations, working to undo some of the damage he'd helped cause. "And the wolves?" Ash asked, the words coming out thick and strange through his wired jaw. Rodriguez pulled out her phone, showed him wildlife camera footage. King Titan moving through the forest at dawn, favoring his right foreleg slightly but mobile, hunting small game with the efficiency of an apex predator who refused to be diminished by 3 bullets and field surgery. His pack was intact, all 6 members who'd stood guard during the cave surgery, plus the 23 others who'd formed that protective circle. "He's healing," Rodriguez said. "Slower than he'd like, probably, but healing." 6 months later, Ash stood at the dedication ceremony for the Rocky Mountain Wilderness Sanctuary. The land Jax had tried to exploit, 40,000 acres of pristine territory where illegal traps had claimed dozens of wolves over the years, was now permanently protected. Federal designation, state oversight, funding guaranteed for the next 50 years minimum. The footage had gone viral. Someone's phone camera had captured the moment when 30 wolves surrounded Ash's dying body, when King Titan had taken 3 bullets. When rangers arrived to find a teenage boy and a massive alpha wolf both bleeding out in the snow. The video had been viewed 40 million times. News outlets across the world had picked it up. Conservation organizations had rallied. Donations poured in from every continent. $3 million in the first month alone. All because a 17-year-old orphan had stood up to poachers and a wolf had remembered mercy from 8 years ago. The ceremony was crowded with people Ash didn't know, politicians and donors and conservation activists who wanted to shake his hand and take photos and tell him he was a hero. He endured it because Dr. Chen had taught him that sometimes you accept recognition not for yourself, but for the cause it serves. Every handshake meant more funding. Every photo meant more awareness. Every speech meant more protected land where wolves could live without fear of steel jaws and poachers' rifles. But when the ceremony ended, when the crowds dispersed and the sun began its descent toward the peaks, Ash hiked to the sacred cave. He'd been making this pilgrimage every Sunday at sunset for 3 months now. Rain or shine, exhausted or energized, it didn't matter. Sunday meant the cave. Sunday meant keeping the promise he'd made to himself while lying in a hospital bed with his jaw wired shut. I will never forget. The cave entrance appeared through the pines exactly as it always did. Ash settled onto the flat rock outside, the one that caught the last rays of sunlight and offered a view across the valley. The mountains were turning gold, that particular shade of amber that only existed in the hour before darkness claimed the sky. He heard them before he saw them, the soft pad of paws on stone, the quiet breathing of creatures who moved through the world like shadows given form. King Titan emerged first, his silver-black coat catching the fading light. Scars from the bullet wounds were visible if you knew where to look, 3 patches of fur that didn't quite lie flat, white scar tissue underneath. He moved with a slight hitch in his right foreleg, a permanent reminder of the bullet that had almost killed him. But he was alive, strong, still the alpha. Sometimes he came alone. Sometimes his pack followed, 6 wolves who'd stood guard during the surgery, who'd witnessed one species saving another and understood that loyalty transcended biological boundaries. Today it was just King Titan. The massive wolf approached to within 3 feet, sat, tilted his head in that gesture that still looked more dog than predator. His amber eyes met Ash's, and in them Ash saw everything that mattered. Recognition. Trust. The kind of bond that couldn't be broken by time or distance or the fundamental difference between human and wolf. They sat together in silence, watching the mountains turn from gold to orange to deep purple as the sun completed its arc. Ash didn't need to speak. King Titan didn't need to vocalize. The presence was enough. The shared space, the synchronized breathing, the understanding that they'd both been given second chances by the same mathematics of mercy. The mathematics of compassion never balanced on spreadsheets. They balanced in moments like this, in the silence between human and wolf, in remembered kindness repaid with life, in the understanding that true connection required no words, only presence and remembered mercy. Ash had freed one wolf cub from a trap 8 years ago, expecting nothing in return. He'd done it because it was right, because the cub was suffering, because mercy was its own reward. 30 wolves had formed an army to save his life, asking nothing, expecting nothing, acting purely on the memory of kindness given and the debt written into their collective consciousness. Some debts were paid in moonlight and blood, in heartbeats synchronized across species, in the willingness to take 3 bullets for a human who'd shown that not all of mankind was threat and violence. King Titan stood, stretched, pressed his scarred paw briefly against Ash's hand. The same gesture he'd made the night Ash was dying, the promise renewed every Sunday as the sun set. Then the massive wolf turned and disappeared into the darkening forest, heading back to his pack, back to his territory, back to the life he'd almost lost. Ash sat until the stars emerged, tiny points of light that had witnessed everything. His broken jaw had healed. His frostbitten fingers had recovered most of their function. His hypothermia was a memory written into medical records and viral videos. But the connection, that bond forged in steel jaws and bullet wounds and field surgery in a cave at dawn, that would never fade. He hiked back to his cabin as the temperature dropped, his breath forming clouds in the mountain air. Tomorrow was Monday, school, regular life, the ordinary concerns of a 17-year-old trying to finish his senior year. But every Sunday, he'd return to the cave. Every Sunday, King Titan would come. And the mountains would bear witness to the truth that loyalty knows no species, that kindness creates debts deeper than any contract, that sometimes the most profound connections are the ones that transcend language entirely. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that loyalty and courage still exist in a world that sometimes feels like it's forgotten both, then do something with that feeling. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories about the bonds that transcend species, the justice that comes when good people refuse to stay silent, and the redemption that's possible even in the darkest moments. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and share your own story. Have you ever been rejected for doing the right thing, punished for showing mercy, abandoned when you needed help most, only to find it came from an unexpected source? Your story matters. Someone else needs to hear it. Someone else is lying in their own snow, wondering if kindness counts, if standing up matters, if anyone will remember the small mercies they've extended into an indifferent world. Be their answer. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that loyalty exists, that some debts are repaid in ways we never expect, that the compassion we show today might save our lives tomorrow. See you in the next story.